Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gaming Nation, and welcome to the Dice Pool Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the Genesis role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and this episode we want to talk to you about an often overlooked aspect of the game, namely Setback Dice. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to my fellow hosts and friends, GM Huzz and GM Flano. How are we, boys?
Yeah. Hello.
I'm not too sure. Did you say, how are you boys or hello boys?
I said, how... Oh, I don't know what I said there.
Well, that's okay. I'm doing well, and I can't... This new amp is doing my head in because I sound completely different again.
It's done amazing. Yeah, because our other one died. But anyway, that's all right. I was just not going to live with that exposed wire anymore because I could just see one of us getting fried, and then we'd have no podcast. Mm-hmm. So that'd be bad. But anyway, as you can probably tell, listeners, unfortunately, GM Caitlin, a.k.a. Darth Fire, as you can be reminded from last episode, isn't able to make it due to a scheduling conflict. Namely, her partner has come in from the boat ship. I don't know what you call it. I'm
Boat
sure
ship.
that our...
Some naval people are spinning in the roads around here, including me.
Including Keith Capel, probably. Yeah, so due to a scheduling conflict, she wasn't able to make it in for this episode, but we will continue on without her. So yeah.
You could say it was a bit of a setback.
Oh, yeah, you could. That's very typical.
It's a shame we haven't got a knack for it.
We do have a knack for it, though.
We don't. We have the setback still here.
Oh, true.
Oh, no, because her setback was like adding 4 setbacks to the check. So we can only move 2 for a knack for it.
Yeah.
So we're still at the setback.
So we have knack for it. Podcasting. Excellent. Love it. So what's everybody been up to gaming-wise? Michael?
Since our last recording, what have I done? We had a game of Android. That was immediately after our last recording.
We did.
That was a lot of fun.
Was it?
From my spot of the table, it certainly was.
Sure. Was it from mine?
It was a brief summary that there was no combats, but yet at the same time, I think the players wished they were in combats.
I wish there were more combats.
Because there was just them sinking themselves deeper and deeper into all sorts of trouble. They now have 3 crime syndicates after them.
Yep.
There's a 3. You've got Yakuza?
Yes.
Or how do you like to say it properly? Yakuza?
The Yakuza, yeah.
Trimaf.
Yep.
And I don't think you've managed to tick off anyone else. So it's just 2. Just 2 at the moment. Oh, no, let's include Dexter, the opposing club owner of another club you guys trashed.
Yeah.
I hate that guy.
There's a bit of a social combat there, which the players unfortunately they didn't lose. They met a bit of an impasse and agreed to sort of settle on terms.
Yeah, it was we got him to compromise. So he didn't outright just kill us.
So to fill the listeners into what we're talking about, in the first session, the players were asked to go to Dexter's club called the Brimstone, and it's a club in the Undercity, so it's quite seedy. And Dexter, his main draw of cash was running death sport arenas for clones. The thing is, he wasn't doing anything illegal because he 100% acquired these clones legally. He bought clones that were near retirement, and he was psychologically breaking them and having them murder each other in blood sport fashion for the spectacle of the audience. Right. Now, there is some people who don't quite like that in the upper city, and for activists for clones' rights and whatnot. One of them approached the PCs and asked if they could go down and liberate these slaves.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the players decided to do that in a pretty aggressive manner, and a lot of things got trashed. So, as you can imagine, Dexter wasn't overly impressed with that outcome. So he arrived at the players' nightclub, which they owned, shortly after, and asked for a please explain as to why you destroyed my nightclub. It was an interesting situation because in any other setting, if they weren't clones, Dexter's the bad guy through and through. The thing is, he's done nothing wrong here. It's the players who, by the law, that's LAW, have done everything wrong. And Dexter's saying, well, if you don't make this right, I'm going to report you to the authorities. And he has every right to do so. And it's an interesting spin on it. The players inadvertently playing the bad guys whilst being the good guys. So it's a cool take on morality right there.
Yes, indeed.
But as for the rest of what's going on in terms of the various organised crime woes that they're having, would you like to explain that to them, please, Ian?
No, I don't particularly want to explain it to
Essentially,
them.
I will. It's okay. Essentially, Ian's character, without thinking twice about it, took on a deal from Triumph to kill a Yakuza lieutenant who happened to be staying at the Brimstone's brothel, and asked the group's assassin, Martin's character, to do it for him, without informing Martin's character, who is a Yakuza trying to regain his honor, that the target he had to kill was the Yakuza lieutenant. So there was definitely a clash of interest there. And things didn't go well because Martin's character decided not to kill the Yakuza but tried to warn him. But in doing so, rolled a despair.
Yeah.
And things have gone downhill ever since. And yeah, last session was them getting in more and more hot water. So that was a recap of that.
Wow.
All out of context. I'm sure listeners are going, I don't know what's going on. But needless to say, it's a lot of drama, and the following episode, the following adventure,
Yes.
is going to be quite hectic. And I have a pile of adversary cards next to my laptop right now that are about at least a foot high.
He's trying to intimidate us with the
yeah.
size of his pile.
I am. But there's even Star Wars cards in here.
Ooh.
So there's a good chance Darth Vader's one of these cards.
Oh, great.
So, just saying.
Wow.
But no, that's basically what we've done up. But no, actually, no, we played. I'll let you cover that one.
We did play one other game. We started the first of our Terran Off campaign last night. Unfortunately, GM Hooly is not a part of that game because there is a scheduling conflict.
Because he runs a Star Trek game.
Yes.
He
and
does run a Star Trek
I'll
game.
talk about that in a tick. Anyway, go on.
But I ran the players through a pretty typical adventure where they met in a tavern. They heard whispers of a mine, and the dwarf immediately went, I want to go investigate that. Unfortunately, the mine is overrun by kobolds.
Right.
They did manage to kill all of the
A lot of
kobolds.
kobolds. Including a baby kobold.
They did. They had no qualms about killing the baby
Oh,
kobold.
because
Wow.
it's a parasite.
They just murdered it. Squashed its skull.
An adventure
And,
killed my baby.
don't forget, we're being paid by ears for these things. So
Well, he said heads, but you guys said, "Well, why do we take ears?"
would you
It's
be
much easier.
would you be more okay for us to take the head of the infant kobold?
No, yeah, you didn't stop to take the ear. You didn't bother. It didn't bother you that you stopped to take the ears of this baby
No,
kobold
yeah.
in order to collect the reward.
Well, it's 5 gold. Why wouldn't we not?
It's 10 gold.
10 gold. That's even better.
Wow, and this family-friendly podcast is brought to you by...
Well, don't forget my character and one of the players, Bill. We had a bit of a discussion of like maybe we should keep the baby kobold, breed them, and then get a kobold ear farming business going on.
Once the mine is returned to the ownership of the villagers, I'm sure that the going rate for kobolds might drop a little
Well,
bit.
it depends on how much we liberate the thing.
Well, I mean, you don't know what's beyond the next door because they did find a map that ended at some new construction at the end of the mine, leading them to some ancient ruins. They got as far as the door, which was this massively reinforced door of like foot-wide steel that had been blasted open by magic, with tracks going in of one individual.
with a staff, as we could best determine, with the scrapings in the dirt.
And this had only happened in the last few hours, and this is where we've left it.
But
Do they go further in to see what this individual can do to them, or do they retreat?
But it was a very fun session. Good job to Flano for running it, because it was good to play a simple dungeon crawling, no complex overtones, anything like that game.
I
It was
didn't
just
put too much into
No, it was good fun.
Yeah.
And it was it's our first time really sinking our teeth into Terran Off, like at the table. Like we've obviously done a lot of work with it around it, but when you have to try and do more focused stuff in terms of content playtesting, etc., you don't really get to let your hair down. So it was good to do that and enjoy it for what it is. And yeah, I was playing a primalist with a focus, so she can conjure creatures really, really easily. And yeah, it's fun to play that. And I've never actually played that in any sort of role playing game before, because I usually find the summoning of creatures and stuff like that. You don't get much reward for your effort, especially in like D&D and whatnot. Like
in D&D, it's just no, you don't bother.
Yeah, until you get to like an extremely high level. So it's a long wait before you get enjoyment out of it. But in Genesis, in Terran Off, I was able to have a pack or minion group of, what were they?
We used the stats for
Flesh rippers?
Flesh rippers.
But we called them like wolves.
Yeah,
like scary wolves.
Basically, I narrated it to be something conjured from like my character's dark imagination, and she made that whole and made it a thing. A perfect example: I just grabbed a stat block out of my NPC folder, ripped it out, chucked it down, and summon a creature in 3 seconds. No,
I'll tell you what,
preamble.
those kobolds didn't know what hit them.
No, they failed their fear checks. Those things give. Then for the nighttime conditions and the creature's defense, they were rolling 5 setback dice to attack them.
Wow.
And it was
They actually still hit.
once. There was a kobold who rolled the triumph, who called, and who, as we narrated to be, as the dog was eating the kobold like plunged his dagger up through the roof of the dog's mouth and killed the dog at the same time.
That the dog bit down
Yes,
and chopped him in half.
Because you hit with a triumph and roll like 5 threats, so that we can use the threat to kill one of the minion groups, and that's how we sort of rolled it all together. But it's a perfect example of how those threat added the setback dice, added all that threat to the check. And made that really an epic scene. Like it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And the setback those dogs were giving out to those kobolds really painted an image of like how horrifying it was.
This actually is very topical for our current conversation, and I was
trying to be
He was going the segue.
subtle with that, man.
Well, we still have one more person.
We do. And what have I been up to? Writing a lot of stuff for Night's Edge. Putting up a little bit of a video, which was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And making sure that I did a lot of sort of Dice Pool podcast behind the screen stuff to make sure that, all of the episodes are now up on Podbean, and we're getting a great response. I've been doing, making sure that all the episodes get up on YouTube as well, which they're all up there, which is really cool. And got quite a few subscribers. I was quite impressed with how quickly our subscription went up with YouTube, which was pretty cool.
Thank you.
Doing about yes, thank you to everyone. The downloads that we've been getting from Podbean has been a lot more than what we thought, because beforehand we had it hosted elsewhere. And we weren't sort of able to really get a look at the stats behind it. So now to Podbean, we can get that feedback back. So thanks to everybody for downloading. Let your friends know about the podcast, and keep those downloads coming, which is really cool.
It's good to see the numbers being tracked like that now, opposed to before we just like guess it.
Yeah,
but it's
good. That's really good. So, but then I've been doing some Night's Edge, which has been exciting, so can't wait for people to see all of that.
Only if the viewers could see the Word document I had open here for all the weapons and everything I'm working on right now.
Ooh.
Exciting stuff.
Very cool. And then last but not least, I actually managed to, other than playing in Mike's game, I managed to get another episode of the Star Trek game on the table. Unfortunately, I'm struggling with that system. I think I'm just... I need to really spend some time with it, and I don't have a lot of time. We're going to hold off on doing any more of those in the near future. We're probably going to go over to Edge of the Empire, because we've got a couple of new players that are getting a little bit, to be perfectly honest, they're getting a little bit bored.
Well, Star Trek is a very, like mechanics alone or not, Star Trek is a very heavy themed setting. It doesn't matter what dice you're rolling or how you're rolling them. Star Trek isn't going to appeal to a younger audience who wants to shoot things and ask questions later. And Star Trek is deliberately the opposite of that. It's supposed to incite high moral choices and et cetera, not shoot questions asked later. That's more Edge of the Empire in some scenarios.
Absolutely. So we're just going to try that. We also had a few players down as well. So it was just a little bit frustrating, but still a good session. We managed to get a few little encounters through, but I think I just need to spend a little bit more time with that game. I still can't have it take away from my enjoyment of Genesis. So who knows? We'll, if we do Star Wars, great. We may do Terran Off. We may do Shadow of the Beanstalk, or we may do Night's Edge. I don't know. Get some more Night's Edge play on the table. Who knows? But anyway, so that's what I've been up to. Now, before we go any further, Huzz, what's our podcast spotlight?
Well, this week we spotlight Squad Tactica, a Warhammer 40,000 kill team podcast focused on the kill teams and the narratives they forge. Join the guys as they talk about kill team rules, fluff, squad building, customization, personal narrative, and battle reports. This show is all about kill team and all the exciting things you can experience as you explore what the game has to offer. You can learn more about this and many other podcasts on the D20 Radio Network by visiting www. The W's always get me. I'm just going to say d20radio.com.
That's a much better idea.
Because if you don't know what the W's are in this, internet's not for you. Go home.
Very, very good.
Yep.
What sort of experience have you guys had with Kill Team? Because I'm not actually played it.
I played a little bit when it first came out. Yep. It does appeal to me a lot more than Warhammer currently does in terms of how the rules work. I think they're pretty trash. Sorry if you're a Warhammer player listening to this, but I've been playing Warhammer since 3rd. I've played a lot of 2nd edition and Rogue Trader, so I've had a lot of experience with Warhammer 40,000, and the current rules are basically the more dice you roll, the more tactically brilliant you are, apparently.
Right.
But Kill Team brings back a lot more of the narrative, flair, and fun that Warhammer should have.
Which I like.
It focuses on more of the storytelling aspect of the game. And you're not playing big bad heroes all the time. You're playing the guys you create, the little guys who work in the shadows and stuff like that. It's very, very flavoursome. I like to play more of it, but I've got a million games on the go, so I've got a Adeptus Arbites Kill Team sitting at home that I picked up from a miniature company called RTLW.
Very good company,
beautiful company who have just released their own miniature game. But that's a story for later. But yeah, great system, and by the sounds of it, the guys over at Squad Tactica, they love that more narrative side of it. So that's why they're a good pick, and that's why I saw them and thought, hey, that'd be a great shout out for our podcast, because we all like the narrative.
Indeed, very good. I know that GM Mick, who people will remember from a few episodes back, he is a bit of a big player of it, of kill teams as well.
Oh, it's great. It's a 2 foot by 3 foot board.
Yep.
Play size, which is very small for a war game, but it's made with that size in mind. Even the scenarios, everything like that. So you can literally play 3 games of it on like one dining table, like three separate games at one time on one dining table, which we've done before, and it's great.
Cool.
And you play the games, you smash them out in about 40 minutes.
Wow, awesome, very good. Well, gang, we've got a lot to discuss this episode, so should we get into the heart of this discussion?
My favourite part, heart discussion.
Don't you mean core of the show?
I know what I mean.
Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we take a deep dive into a topic concerning the Genesis role-playing game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, tonight's episode will discuss the mighty, albeit often neglected, setback dice. We will be talking about why they're important to use, when they should be used, and give you plenty of suggestions on how they're implemented in your games. So, sit back and relax and get ready to discover the sheer awesomeness that is the almighty setback dice. So, boys, let's talk a little bit about what setback die actually are.
Well, I believe they are 6-sided cubes
that are black in colour.
That are black in colour with white symbols.
Right. Excellent.
Next point.
Right. So, what actually are they for, though?
They're for representing anything that is a challenge in the environment or the circumstances of your activity that you're attempting. That cause you pause.
Yeah, so there's something to do with the environment. There's something to do with the attitude of people. There can be a whole host
A whole
of things.
range.
It's-
How I think of them and how I paint them to people who are new to this setting, and even people who have been not setting. Sorry, can't. What Genesis is setting
The game.
the game. What I find helps them, I paint them as modifiers. They are the game's +3, -3, or whatever D&D what modifier range they work in.
Yeah.
They are what makes things slightly harder, slightly
your
easier.
adjustments.
Exactly, because this game doesn't have them traditionally.
No.
That's what these are. And that's what makes this game so accessible and easy to play, is the fact you're not number crunching like that. So that's what these things, that's what these bad boys are for. To take away that counting on five hands like you have to in Pathfinder sometimes.
5 hands. You're getting off light, mate.
Exactly what I mean. But yes.
So yeah, so they're all of your, as you say, your plus and minuses. So, but there are also things like if you're talking about armor, it may have some sort of defense. If you're talking about cover, another example.
Those dice don't do anything in those situations. We all know that.
It's just anything that is going to hinder your check, that prevents your check from being the norm.
Yep.
So
Good old modifier.
So yeah, so if you've got difficulty of 2 or an easy check, what makes that check different from every other check? Well, it's windy, or it's the snowstorm is really, really hard. That sort of stuff. That is what the realm of the setback die is.
And I think a lot of people will not discuss this more, but what are the sort of the intro point of this discussion? It's a lot of GMs, from what I've seen in my experience, from like playing other games or watching other games, is they often overlook the setback dice. I don't know if
Or they assume that the players can remove them, so they don't have them.
But I think I don't know what the mentality is. Like, I don't know if it's they just simply don't understand them, they don't think of them, or they might feel like they're being adversarial by adding them. Because unlike other things in most games, if there's a modifier or a setback, it's usually a set thing. If I'm shooting someone behind wall in one particular game I'm playing, that's always going to occur. Because Genesis is a lot more loose in how it works, the setback dice aren't always rigid. They can come from other unwritten things.
Yeah.
And GMs have to sort of be open to adding them where appropriate. And we'll go into the depth of that very, very shortly.
Yep.
Well, from my perspective, going back to the example that we were talking about earlier where we were fighting the kobolds, I had to, several times when I was setting perception checks to navigate in the dark of the tunnel, I had to go, I was thinking about difficulty of that check, and I was like, it should be really hard to navigate here. I'm like, no, actually, it should only be average.
If this was a well-lit room, it wouldn't be hard to search this room.
No, it'd be average.
Yeah. But
there are 2 setback dice in there because of the darkness.
which is something we're definitely going to cover in greater detail, because that's a whole range of things right there.
But yes, so if anybody's interested in finding out exactly what the rules say about what a setback die is, you can turn to page 10 of your core rulebook if you're following on at home, which basically just nuts out exactly what we just said, in fewer words, of course. That will tell you exactly what a setback die is and how it's seen in the game.
And what we're trying to do here is make them open people's eyes to them, I guess.
I feel like
approachable.
I feel like we're trying to remove some setbacks here.
From setbacks. That's meta, man. That's so deep.
Very good. All right, so let's talk about how important the setback dice actually are. So I know that there seems to be a little bit of a talk, and I spoke about it in the video. If you have seen it, if you haven't, take a look. That there just seems to be a bit more of a move away, especially when it comes to talents, with regards to not removing setback die or not adding setback die to checks or whatever else. There seems to be more for adding advantages and adding threats and things like that. And talking to a number of people just online, as well as talking to some people at Gamination Con, there just seems to be this whole, we don't use setback die in our games. Yeah. And Flano, you mentioned it before that GMs, I think, either forget about them, and I've spoken to people online that have said, yeah, I have a little notation on my GM screen that says, and this is all it says, add setback die. Because it's something which is, easily forgotten. It's also a case that because players have talents, especially in Star Wars more than anything else, that remove setback die, GMs just have gone into this habit of not adding them for whatever reason. Because they think, the players are just going to remove them anyway, so why mention that?
Well, see... yes. If you know your players well at the table, you're going to know they have ways of removing setback dice, especially in obvious circumstances. But by choosing not to add them, it does two things. A, it makes the player feel kind of cheated that they're not getting the use of their talent.
Yes.
Yep.
And that's more of a psychological thing, because you as a GM already have decided to skip that step and gone, I know they're removing it, so I won't bother saying it.
Yeah.
It's going to, A, make the player feel like that talent's not doing anything, when in fact it is. They just don't realise it is. And B, by not adding setback, you're missing out on the opportunity to narratively describe what those setback are. Because those setback are basically your painting tools to help paint the picture.
Yep.
It's pouring down rain. Add 2 setback to your check. The player goes, well, I actually remove that because of this. And you go, okay, cool, sweet.
Because I'm adept at dancing in the rain.
Exactly. So, in a matter of one sentence, you've painted, you've everyone at the table, you've reinforced the idea that it's pouring down rain in this scene. Because if you say it once at the start of the encounter that it's raining, two rounds into the scene or into the encounter, I guarantee your player's going to forget it's been raining, unless you say it before every check where rain's going to be a hindrance. Then it's going to be a constant reinforcement in their minds that it's raining. And it gives that really vivid, strong image to your players when they're rolling dice at your table.
I know it helps me because I've got a picture of the world in my head and I sometimes forget to describe things. But
It's
having those reminders, both for me as a storyteller and when I'm as a player, it helps visualize the scene.
Absolutely.
But you were saying that there's this whole perception about how Fantasy Flight Games are stepping back from setback.
It certainly seems to be, and I think that's possibly to do with feedback from players that they may be receiving. I mean, that's the only reason why. Or they feel that the talents that they've already...
We should make that clear when we say they're stepping back from setback dice. They're not, for those who might not know what we're talking about, they're not stepping back from setback dice and removing them from the game.
I think that there's a big misperception about what that actually looks like.
Exactly. Like I think when I was at Gamination Con, I fell off my chair when someone told me that Knack for it wasn't good. And I've gone,
it's one of my favorites.
I know, and I've just gone, what? Excuse me? Say again? It's a tier 1 talent that lets you remove 2 setback dice. Then it sort of dawned on me then, like, wow, okay, yeah, I guess if the common mentality is that there's no setback dice being added to checks, then yeah, it's a terrible talent. Well, if you know your GM never had setback to checks you make, then why bother? But in our particular circle, or how we all play, and setback are super common. So to us, it's the best bang for your buck talent you can get for 5 XP.
I love Knack for it on vigilance and perception.
Yep.
But we talk about setback being the narrative and adding to the narrative. But you know what also adds to that narrative? Knack for it, because it tells the GM, yourself, and all the other players at the table, your character is so particularly good in that one thing that they overcome all these usually fairly crippling circumstances to make this check without those being a hindrance. Okay, you're trying to negotiate with someone, and he's surrounded by his armed goons trying to loom over you. The GM's determined they're going to give you 2 setback, but it's okay. I remove 2 setback dice from any charm checks that I make.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden,
completely not phased.
if you're watching that character on screen, he's sitting back casual, smiling like a champion, ignoring the fact that he has these armed goons looming over him. And that's only coming to play in this scene because of that, from that talent interacting with setback dice.
Because one of the things, if we look back in history as far as Star Wars goes, there are countless talents which are out there which remove one setback die, and they're all ranked talents. So what it became down to is because there are so many different trees that were adding setback die in a different way, that you were having all of these very specific circumstances where setback die were being removed. And so people are going, we've got to spend all this XP on all of these talents that really are very much a niche and hardly ever come up. And so they were getting frustrated with it. So obviously the feedback to that would be the creation of knack for it. Now, I still maintain the knack for it is an awesomely overpowered talent for a tier 1 talent.
Well, again, it comes down to the playgroup, though. Some playgroups is rubbish. And
But that's it. But I think what that the design goal there then is to not continue to spread out all of these talents that essentially do the same thing across all of these different books, is to create more talents that are interesting and create spotlight moments in the game where you're doing something cool.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing which I think is really cool is that you can only ever take knack for it 5 times because it's a tiered talent, and it does get more expensive.
But when you take it that second time, you
get 2 skills. That's exactly right. Yeah, so, and then for every tier above that, you get 2 additional skills, which means that you can really craft your character exactly the way that you need it to, based on how you visualize what your character is good at. And then I think all that you really need to do then is come up with a really cool story reason why your character's removing that 2 setback. If we go back to the example that you used before, Flano, where, you're dancing in the rain, right?
Yeah. I have a knack for it.
You have a knack for it. But the thing is that what's the reason? Why is that? If it was a case of somebody's on a tightrope over lava, we'll just channel Caitlin for a moment. But if you're using the tightrope and it is raining and all of the steam and whatever else is coming up from the lava, that you might have 3 or 4 setback die because of that scenario.
Well, I can immediately tell you why they might ignore those 2 setback from the rain, which rain's a distraction in the day.
Yep.
It's because you've been a performer on Broadway.
Yep. And
you're used to a crowd of people cheering and making raucous noise.
Yep.
A little bit of rain's nothing.
Exactly. But what you've just said then has added to your character. It's added to the scene. So the audience, if you want to look at anyone outside of the game, they're going, I understand that character. That character's now got a little bit more depth.
And it's
what? It's not just remove a setback die.
No.
It is remove a setback die because of this reason.
And you know what else? When you come to having rolled that and the setback dice come up with those results, because you've only removed 2 out of the 4, we know where it's come from. Exactly. It's definitely not because of the rain.
No.
It's because of the steam coming up and the heat.
Which is something beyond what you're used to. It's overwhelming that character. Like, for that character to be overwhelmed in that situation, that's a big deal for that character.
Yeah. And it drives so much narrative.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a really good pro tip for GMs out there. When you see your players have knack for it, ask them at some time during the session, when the first time they use knack for it, get them to explain in a narrative fashion why they have knack for that. Why do you have knack for it in hacking? In computers.
Yeah.
Well, because of blah, 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 blah. And that player may know why his character has knack for it until you ask him. And then once they answer, you as a GM, everyone at the table, even that player themselves, are suddenly more aware, as you were saying earlier, about that character.
You're more connected. Everyone at the table is more connected to that character now.
That's right.
And because it's happened during an event in the game where everyone's sharing that moment, people are more likely to have that stick in their minds.
Yeah,
absolutely. Now, something that you mentioned before, which is a nice segue, is looking at the dice and using the dice to tell the story better. Now, this is something that we talked about a little bit earlier when in an earlier episode, where we talked about using the dice and where the symbols land to help tell the narrative. And this is more than any other dice, other than perhaps the boost die, is setback die, and whereabouts, probably with the exception of the triumph. The triumph or the despair, especially with the despair when you're determining exactly where that despair is coming from before it's applied. That you can tell by looking at the dice where certain effects have come from and how that can then be used to tell the story.
And it's important to say it can be used that way. It's not necessary.
It doesn't have to be,
but
no.
It's a great guide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if you're newer to the system.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I always encourage people that are new to the system, that have sort of gotten over the idea of, I know what cancels what, that they can then, I always tell them, don't move the die. Just sort of, if you are going to move them, just if you're doing it in a dice tray or something like that, don't remove them completely from the dice tray. Just move them across into the dice tray so that you know exactly where the dice are and where they've come from.
All right, so give us an example of what you're talking about, because if you're new to this, you might be lost in what we're saying.
That is true. Okay, so basically if you've got, let's say you've got 2 yellows, 2 greens, 2 purples, and 3 setback die, okay? And you've successfully managed to remove a setback die. So we'll use the scenario of, actually, let's make it 4 setback die so that we can keep in theme with what we were talking about before. So if you've removed the 2 setback die and you've said that you've been a circus performer and you've operated in the rain before, and so you're not getting affected by the rain, but you're getting affected by the steam. So what you're doing is when you're making that check, you are going, okay, so I know where the symbols are on the positive die. I'm now going to move those across just to one side, because they cancel each other out. Meaning that in the center of the dice tray, that
or
you
your rolling
have,
area,
or your rolling area, or whatever else, you know that those dice are what the symbols for your check are going to be coming from. So you can then look at that and say, okay, well, I've got a triumph from a skill that hasn't been sort of knocked out yet. I've succeeded on the check. I know that from calculating all of the totals. But I've got these 2 setback die that have come from, that have got threats on them. So we know that those 2 threats have, because of the description that we've provided by setting the difficulty at the start and where those dice have come from, we know that through the narrative of the check, that those 2 setback die have come specifically from the steam, and those threat have specifically come from the steam as well.
So you might choose to apply them as strain as you've started to sweat and
boil.
boil in the heat of this
steam board on a tightrope above lava.
Exactly.
And that strain is then a lot more colourful than just take 2 strain.
Yeah.
You're sweating in the steam. You're literally starting to boil. You can feel your skin starting to go lobster red.
Yep.
Take 2 strain.
Yeah, or go to the next extent that because of the moisture that's coming up from the lava, that it's affecting the rope, and the rope's starting to sort of like extend a little bit and sag. So that's going to be a setback die to your next check.
Exactly. There's so many ways you interpret that, and that's just coming from what the 2 setback dice have aided you in.
That's right.
And I will reiterate, that's not how it has to be done.
It's a good way.
But it's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the GM may have a better idea of those 2 threat on the setback dice that he may have in his mind already. But if you're in that situation, like, I really can't think of anything right now, if you need that aid, use that method.
Yep.
And almost every time you're going to be able to think of something, because your mind is a lot more put on a track then.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a lot more easier to think on the spot if you have an angle to think towards.
Absolutely. So let's get pretty much, I think, covered what the importance of the setback die is and how important it is to include in every single check. The only thing that I'd like to add to that is that some people find it difficult to come up with that reason for a setback die. Okay. I'm of the opinion that you add at least one setback die to every check. Doesn't matter what it is, you just know that in the back of your mind, you're going to have to add a setback die. And therefore, because I think that there is no such thing as a perfect check. There's no such thing, unless there is, it's the perfect scenario that, you've carefully planned and there's no outside influences or anything like that.
Well, if you, I get what you're saying. If you're looking for a reason to add a setback dice, it'll help you. It'll prompt you to remember to do that.
Yeah.
If you look and there's nothing, don't add it.
No.
But if you're always looking at when you're crafting a check that you think that there's never a perfect moment, you should be looking for that reason to add something.
Yep.
If you've got my general rule of thumb is if you have to think for more than 3 seconds as to why there's a setback there, you probably won't need a setback.
Yeah.
But that's what you're saying. It's a great idea to come into it with that
Thinking
mindset.
that there should be
a setback there. And then go, okay, no, actually this situation's pretty good. You've got everything that you need. It's not terrible. I'm not going to bother announcing that setback to the player. And that's GM Hooly's particular way of doing it. I myself don't do it that way necessarily, but I always ask myself. And I say it openly to the players.
Similar thing.
And I go, oh, is there any need for a setback? I can't think of anything. Off you go. There's the moment of like held breath from the players. Like,
I love it when the players actually give a reason for a setback.
yeah, I've done that plenty of times.
Absolutely.
The thing that I like to do is when it's the NPC's check, and I say, oh, I've got this dice pool. I craft it in front of them, and then I go, oh, they should have setback, and then the players volunteer it, and then that gives me the right to add that to their check on the.
Exactly. That's another good way of doing it. But
Absolutely.
if you approach, it's basically, I think the rule of thumb here is to keep the setback, asking yourself if there's a setback dice required here at the forefront of your mind every time you're announcing a check to the player.
Yep.
Have the note on your GM screen that says setback dice. Get it tattooed onto your back of your palm.
That's dedication.
Exactly. But get yourself in the practice of doing it, because it is an easy thing to skip over if you're not in the practice of.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Until you're in the practice of it, it's a good plan.
Absolutely.
Well, in talking about that, then I'd like to go back to the example that we had.
Yep.
Of hunting down the kobolds in the abandoned mine.
Yeah, which is what you guys had in your Terran Off game. Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't have to think too hard about the setbacks.
Yep.
I wanted there to be some setback because I don't know if people are aware. If you don't have Terran Off, the kobold is an excellent early monster because they have this ability called not another one.
Yeah.
And if the player generates 2 threat on any checks targeting the creature, another kobold joins that minion group. If they roll a despair, another entire minion group composing of 3 kobolds joins the scene.
Yeah.
So when I designed this encounter, I wanted them to be fighting them in the dark because that's automatically adding 2 setbacks to any checks that they make, which increases the chance of these kobolds crawling out of the walls, out of the, who knows where, to fight them. Unfortunately, they only actually rolled 1 despair in the entire fight.
Right.
Didn't generate any threat more than 1 at a time on any check. So I was very disappointed. I mean, it's to their own detriment. They were getting 10 gold ahead and they only got...
I would have rolled more despairs. The one time I rolled spares, I couldn't do it.
But
that's when you have players begging for setback die as soon as they get to that stage.
There was a lot going about because, I mean, the kobolds themselves don't have dark vision.
Yep.
So they were being bothered by this light as well. And the party did have a torch, so they were offsetting one of these setbacks whenever it was within short range.
Right.
When they one of them was an archer. They tried to shoot out beyond short range at some of these kobolds coming in at them. They automatically took an extra setback.
But you know what that archer was doing, though, to try and overcome that setback? The setback existing was making him rethink what he did. He couldn't just run into short range because he didn't want to risk getting close to where he's not as effective. But it was forcing him to become a little bit more immobile and aiming twice every turn to try and offset the setback.
Absolutely.
And what that did is, it changed how his character worked. It made him a little more rigid, which is good because that situation was it's a hard fight in there because it is pitch black. But it also paints an awesome narrative of how this archer is in the darkness trying to take these well-placed shots. And that wouldn't be the case if the setback were there. He would be more likely to run around and be more fluid with his movements.
Because he's a cat folk. And so he doesn't take extra strain for making those extra movements. That's how he planned his character.
Yeah.
But he had to sit still and basically sentry up. And it was a cool, like, fighting the horde, running at you sort of thing. And that's what the setback dice did. And that's not a mechanical thing of the setback dice, but it is a aftermath of the setback dice being there.
And we talked about, on one check, the kobolds had 5 setback dice in the one check.
Yeah.
Because they were fighting something that had defense. They were fighting something that they were afraid of and had
Very
suffered.
afraid of.
Yep. So they'd taken... I didn't make them run away because they were in their home turf. But they took an extra setback on all checks targeting these things. And they also had...
There was one for defense.
One for defense.
One for fear. Two for
darkness.
There was one group which had an extra setback as well. They were rolling 5. So 4
That's
was
right,
your
because
average rolling.
they'd also suffered an additional
a setback from something else.
From
Yeah.
something else.
From watching their friends being mauled by these
That's what
nightmarish
it was.
creatures.
It was, yes. And it added a lot to the narrative.
It did. It really made... I think at that point in time, everyone sort of got a... I never described what these hellish creatures were. I said
No.
they're wolf-like creatures. And...
From the depths of your mind. You described them well enough.
Exactly. But as soon as the idea of the player's perspective, the character perspective, all they could see were these shapes coalescing in the darkness
Yeah.
and the screaming of terrified kobolds who were on the offensive, now starting to flip to the defensive as they were being hunted by their nightmares. And that came from the fact they were rolling 5 setback dice. Like, that's impressive. Like, that's true fear right there when you're rolling with those sort of...
We didn't even have to think very much about where these dice came from. Like, I didn't have to go fishing.
They came
for
naturally.
setbacks.
They came naturally.
They were just there because of the environment.
Absolutely.
And that's something that you can do. Just think about where they are.
Well, we're talking about 5 setbacks. So how many do we add to a check? I generally do a rule of thumb of 1 setback per bad condition. But if it's a really bad condition, maybe more. That's my general rule of thumb. I think that's...
Well, that's the Pitch Black gave 2.
Because then that was like, wow, this is really dark because there's 2 in here. It's not just a gloom, it's dark. And
I think there should be no limit to how many you give to a single check.
No. But at a time for each circumstance.
Right. But for each individual thing, 2 is probably a good number if it's something bad, or 1 if it's just a minor inconvenience.
Exactly.
It's the same thing with cover, right? So if you've got light cover, it's 1.
Yep.
If it's heavy cover, you get 2.
Absolutely.
And that's sort of where they leave it. They don't define it more than that. And the... although it is important to note that defense caps at 4.
It does.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean your setback die
From
cap at
other
4.
from other events.
No, because you could
just-
have 4 from defense.
Absolutely. And then if you've got other conditions, like if it's raining and it's windy and, you know, you've got somebody that you're firing at that has a defensive 4, you could have that, depending on the circumstances, you could have 8 setback die.
Oh, well, some of 4 defense in pitch black darkness, i.e. the mine we're in, that's 6 straight away.
Could you
Yeah.
Other factors might come into play as well.
Could you imagine what would have happened if there was some sort of kobold shaman that came out of the darkness who had like adversary and defense and used his magic to put out your torch?
Yeah, exactly. It'd be
Pitch black. There you
we're
go.
suddenly rolling a lot of black dice.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then more kobolds just start coming out of the walls. Like,
But I think less... Sorry.
I'll tell you what, knack for it then looks pretty good, doesn't it?
Well, no, it doesn't. Do you know why knack for it doesn't look good there? Because knack for it doesn't apply to attacks.
No, that's true.
But if you were trying to run away from the goblins, and the GM says, "Well, you're running in pitch black darkness."
Yep. Make an athletics
And
check.
well, you go, well, I've got knack for in athletics. I'm used to. I am so sure-footed. I just have a natural way to just always step to the safe spot, and the 2 setback dice of the darkness no longer apply to you. While the rest of your party is lagging behind, because you don't need to. You don't need to escape the kobolds. You just need to run faster than your party.
That's very Cthulhu mentality.
But the best thing I like about this is that this turns what is otherwise a pretty pathetic minion group.
Because they were rubbish.
They have 3 wounds.
Soak 1.
Like, yeah, they're rubbish.
One arrow attack was like killing an entire minion group almost every time.
Yeah. But it turns these rubbish minions into somewhat of a threat all of a sudden.
Especially if you start making those minion groups like more than 4 and have them as mass hordes.
I didn't want it to be...
Oh, of course. But could you imagine attacking a 10-strong horde of kobolds in the pitch black darkness? Like, you have to do a lot of wounds to try and stop them.
Yeah, and they're hurting you.
But the setback dice are probably diminishing some of your hits, some of your successes. So you're not doing as much damage.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, they're on you.
And the other thing is that if you're trying to use boost die to at least compensate, that's strain you're using up.
Exactly.
And so that's representing your, like,
straining
absolutely, you're I'm trying to be polite.
No, but the party was...
You are sweating massively to have to, with just the sheer stress and strain of the situation, to the point that you might just have to give up because you suddenly collapse in a heap. I can't handle this anymore.
And you're overwhelmed by the goblins.
Absolutely. So
there's also something else that's worth mentioning at this point in the discussion. Sometimes players will offer you something. Players will often fish for a boost dice.
Yes.
Often inadvertently, they won't realise by fishing for a boost dice, they create themselves another setback.
Yes.
But what I like to do is get the hopes up. And I say, yeah, sure, that's great, add a setback.
But...
add a boost. But because of X, Y, Z, also add a setback.
Yeah.
It's great because it gives players that, like, yes, then, But that's cool because the beauty about the system, because if you're doing in a more traditional RPG, a negative modifier and a positive modifier will cancel one another out and not be a thing.
Yeah.
In this, both remain a thing, which I absolutely love. So I'm all for adding boost dice alongside of setback dice and vice versa, because you can have a negative circumstance which has a positive, or the other way around. Yeah. You just got to. It depends on the scenario and how you're looking at it. I know it comes up more often than you think when you start looking at certain aspects, which I love, and I think that's a very unique thing about this game, and it's often can be overlooked. Like another example would be like, oh, my character's enraged right now. Can I have a boost dice to my attack? And I'm like, sure, have a boost dice to your attack. But because your character's enraged and he's not really taking care, or he doesn't have much precision, also at a setback. That setback could roll a blank, and you could roll a success on your boost dice, or the other way around.
And as I flip a story point, he's really not taking care as to who's friend or foe either. So add a red.
Exactly. So yeah.
The other thing to take into consideration as well for those people who are really into the statistic side of things, a boost die is actually just marginally better than a setback die.
Mechanically speaking.
But I think that
setback dies are scarier for some reason.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the boost dice are offset like that slightly because I think overall the purple dice are because you have a chance of rolling 0 successes, which is a failure. Zero. So if you roll no failures, no successes, that's a failed check. So there's a slightly higher chance of you failing a check because of that anomaly in the rules. But because if you make boost dice slightly stronger than setback dice, that offsets it slightly.
No doubt somebody will post up on when we...
Yeah, we're not number people here.
We are not number people.
This is why we play Genesis.
But from a perspective, boost die are statistically, from my understanding, slightly better than setback. But that being said... 2 setback are roughly worth a purple die. If you think about it that way, like if you've got all of those setback in there and there's a reason for them to be there, the players are going to think twice about what they're doing because that is a lot of
especially if that's tacked onto a check which is already quite difficult. If they're doing a hard check, which is 3 purple, which is not to be sneered at, they are easy to fail 3 purple checks.
Absolutely.
If there's 2 setback in there because of darkness, going back to the kobolds, then
darkness is an easy one, but it doesn't always have to be.
No, it's not at all. But it's the example we've been using. Immediately, that is going to be almost equivalent to a 4 purple check.
Yeah,
and that's a That's a hard check to pass unless
that's
you're
daunting.
really skilled. That is a daunting check. Go figure.
Look, let's just touch base on that very quickly. When it comes to if you're running a game and you're trying to set the difficulties on the fly, this is one thing that people have some difficulties with.
This is my personal bugbear.
Yeah, this is my passion. This one.
Yeah.
If I can get all the Genesis players in the world to play this correctly, it will be amazing for themselves and the people at the table.
It'll improve the game.
Absolutely. So if you've got 2 setback die and if you've got 2 difficulty, so if you've got an average check and you think, this actually should be hard, consider, instead of adding that.
Why do you think it should be hard?
That's right. Is it because of the environment? Is it because of something else that is an outside influence that may instead be 1 or perhaps 2 setback die?
Yeah, because is it hard because what they're trying to do is hard, or is it hard, as you say, because
with
of
factors?
Something? Yeah, because of circumstances.
That's right.
Yes,
and there's a reason why I think you guys are in agreement with me.
100%.
Is because it has a double prong effect. One is that if they've got a knack for it, okay, they get to remove it.
Yes.
And so they can justify up to their 25 XP that they've had to spend, plus all of the other XP that they've had to get the tier 5 talent. If their tier 5 one is the one that they got the coordination role, the coordination skill on, that they can then justify that, and they are going to get enjoyment because they will feel as though that the XP that they've spent was worth it. Which is something which... That's part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that brings us probably to the next part of the discussion.
True.
Setting the difficulty, baseline difficulty, and setback dice.
Yeah, because when you're looking at setting the difficulty, it shouldn't be about how hard do I want to make this for the players. It should be how hard is it under perfect circumstances. And I think we've said this before.
We've briefly gone over it, yeah. But this is the most poignant time to talk about it.
Especially when considering setbacks. It's about how difficult is it to accomplish this task in a perfect environment. And that it's about consistency.
Yep.
So you want that to be the same difficulty, rain, hail, and shine.
Yep.
No matter what is happening. And then you then start looking at setback.
Treat it as a 2-step process. First step, don't worry about setback dice.
Yep.
If you're brand new to this and you're trying to work out how to add setback dice to your games, take this step. Ignore setback dice initially. Set the difficulty. Okay.
Yep.
Kick open this wooden door. I'm going to say it's how hard would it be to kick in a wooden door, you reckon?
I'd say it's probably only...
I'd say average.
I'd say 2.
So an average check.
Yeah.
Average check. So someone of brawn 3, which is above normal.
They should be able to do it with a little bit of effort.
I've seen films. That's good. That's realistic,
Hey,
right?
look, I've actually done it in real life.
You can do it. If you kick the door in the right place.
I can confirm that I've definitely done that in real life.
There you go.
It
Professional.
wasn't as easy as I thought it would be.
So, okay. Average check. Kicking in a wooden door.
Yeah.
Average check. Okay. But this door's got some reinforcement and deadbolts.
Yes.
Okay, it's still a wooden door, though. It's not a metal, solid, it's not protecting a vault or anything like that. It's just a house door. But it has a deadbolt that locks top and bottom.
That's a circumstance.
It has a circumstance. So, after I've set the difficulty, I start applying setback. I immediately apply 1 for the deadbolt.
Yep.
Because that is a circumstance is adding it. If it's a particularly well-reinforced deadbolt, it's got the side lock and the 2 that go up and down. So floor, ceiling, and wall deadbolt.
Yep.
What are they called?
Triple locks?
Triple locks, whatever they're called. I would add another setback for that.
So that's a 2 setback.
Yep.
Yeah.
Suddenly this average check, kicking this door in, is 2 purple,
It's now...
2 setback.
It's essentially a hard check.
It is a hard check, essentially. But my character, the GM asked for an athletics check to kick the door in. My character has knack for it in athletics. I know
He's an actual athlete.
He could be an actual athlete. He's be stronger, or he knows exactly where to kick a door. He's had training in that. He could be special forces, and he knows exactly where to kick.
Because that makes a difference.
It does. So immediately those 2 setback dice go away, and that dude is kicking in the door on 2 purple. The goons behind the door who thought they were safe suddenly aren't safe when you have their SWAT team pouring in with their Mac 5s. It's great.
And you see, just by thinking about where how we've set this difficulty and where it's all come from, we've crafted a narrative. There was no planning for this.
But have I narratively described that door? Not at all. I've described that door in a purely mechanical aspect, but everyone at the table immediately has an image of that door and what it looks like when it's being kicked in by a professional.
Exactly. It's crafted an image in your mind with very little effort.
No, at all. I walk through the steps.
Now, kicking in a door that's actually designed for
not to be kicked in.
Not to be kicked in. It might be a metal door.
Metal door. Yep.
That would be a hard check.
Yep. Absolutely.
But it might also be reinforced. Once again, you add more stuff, and suddenly this special forces guy is not having a good time trying to kick this door in.
That's right.
Let's go to another example, like jumping a gap between two carriages of a train.
Yep.
If that train was still, the gap between two trains is about 3 feet. Anyone could probably do that. I would say it's probably average. It's probably easy difficulty to jump that of an athletics check.
Yep.
The player goes, "Well, I want a running start." Add a boost dice. I know we're talking about setback, but the same principle.
Yep.
Boost dice is added. But, well, actually, we'll do setback dice first, because that's how you should do it. The train's moving. It's moving very, very fast. The track's winding. So the carriages are, rocking back and forwards and twisting. So the expanse between the gap is opening and closing quite significantly. I'm going to add 2 setback dice to that check.
Oh, easily.
So that check has been bumped from easy to average, or effectively average, 1 purple, 2 black.
Yep.
And that player's going to go, well, I'm going to spend maneuver to get a running start on this, and add a boost dice under the GM's permission.
Yep.
Add a boost dice to that check. He happens to have a knack for it in athletics. It's 1 purple, 1 boost.
Yeah, because he knows where are the joins. Because, you could even say if it was somebody who was a mechanic, who has it for whatever reason, he's managed to get athletics and says, oh, look, I know where the hard parts of this train have been bolted together, so I know where to place my feet to get better traction. There's countless
There's a multitude.
reasons.
Or you just simply wait until the train makes a corner enough where the gap between the two carriages shrink, and you jump at the narrowest point. There's so many ways you can paint that. You're obviously a clever person, and you have a knack for, go figure, doing that sort of coordination or that passing that sort of skill.
Exactly.
Now, the other thing, and one of the other reasons to reinforce why we do it this way, is because
it's a correct way of doing it.
Yes, but setback dice and boost dice and things like that can't be upgraded or downgraded.
No, correct.
True.
So, that changes the way the rest of the mechanics work. So if you're looking at an average check, kicking in a door, whatever mechanics come into play aren't going to upgrade or that check any further. It can add to the base difficulty, but you're not going to be adding even more on top of that.
No.
And if a player's got the ability to remove or downgrade a check, they can't do that.
Yep. They need that specific one talent that removes setback. Yes, there are a couple of other ones that do remove setback, but they're very, very specific.
Yes.
Survivor is one of them.
But this is part of the reason why I agree with what's the discussion that's been going on lately, is because I don't want there to be 6,000 different talents that remove setback.
That's why I love knack for it.
Knack for it. You get to describe what it is the reason why your character does this.
Yep, exactly.
And that generates narrative. I would prefer the special forces person to have knack for it, kicking in this door, and if they've got more talents specifically for kicking in doors, it does something cool. Yep. Maybe they can launch that door into the minions behind them, and they've got some talent that does this. And it actually causes damage or immobilizes the people behind it.
They roll a triumph while they're kicking the door in.
Yeah.
They kick it in equilibrium style and ride the door in like a surfboard while shooting their guns.
Because they're talented.
Yes.
Exactly.
That is true.
It does so much.
Reaching for removing setback as an easy go-to for lots of different talents is not as narrative. When you've already got something like knack for it in the game.
You guys mentioned before, do you think knack for it's overpowered at tier 1? It quite possibly could be, but I like it at tier 1 because for 5 XP any starting character can have a cool talent which makes them special.
Exactly.
And as a GM, I'm willing to hand wave a slight imbalance to let the players have that special spotlight moment every so often.
Yeah.
But that spotlight moment only comes every now and then if you're adding setback dice. Even though adding setback dice, those special moments don't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
So yes, work out the difficulty in a perfect circumstance and then apply setback dice.
Yeah.
Like, let's do an extreme example of something that's really difficult.
An extreme
Yeah.
example
Yeah.
of something that uses setback die, yeah?
So let's start with something that would be an easy check normally.
Okay, I'm going to go a little bit outside the box here because this is something that it's easy to talk about a lot of physical challenges and things like that. And I know that we'll get into another episode at a later stage about social encounters. But let's talk about this. So in our social check, there is a guard who is guarding a door and we want to try to convince him
What's his
to
name?
leave. His name's Bob.
Excellent.
I know that's not Bob the guard.
Well, his real name's actually Robert,
His real name's yes, exactly.
but his friends call him Bob because of his, his calm, chill demeanor.
Right. See, we're creating backstories for NPCs. This is something these people do.
In the 80s, he was a upcoming sports star
Right.
for the university, but a knee injury.
Yeah.
Ah, right.
Yeah. So
Excellent.
he was never the same after that.
Okay. But this guy is...
He bumped his knee on a row of chairs. He took an arrow to the knee.
That was a setback to his career.
Wow. Okay.
He wished he had knack for it then.
All right. So we've got our guard, Bob.
He's
and-
slightly balding.
Who's slightly balding. Who had a career in... This isn't a story...
Who
this
took
isn't
a row to the knee? Yeah.
This isn't an episode about creating NPCs, but that's another... We'll get onto that at a later stage, I'm sure. So he's pretty stoic, though. He is the sort of person that it's really hard to try to get past him. So he has a willpower of 3. He's got a willpower of 3.
We
So
see ever since his accident with the sports team, he decided never to let any opportunity slip by again.
Yeah.
So that's why he decided to become the best security guard he could become.
There you go.
Because he didn't want to become another failure, like his alcoholic grandfather.
Yeah.
Right, who's writing up Bob's best stats of the story?
We'll leave that to the fans. He's got a willpower of 3.
Yes. Right. So, it's pretty hard to convince. Okay. So we need to try to get past him, right?
Sure.
Okay. So we've got 3 difficulty.
Because this is an opposed check, correct?
This is
it's
going to be a
be
post check.
deception versus discipline?
This is going to be
Oh,
deception.
vigilance, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
correct.
need to interrupt for a second.
Sure.
Can I get you guys to remind me that I had an idea or something important to discuss regarding this in a few minutes?
Okay, we can do that.
You have an important idea. You should discuss this in
All
a few
right.
minutes.
Wait a minute.
Now, he's under strict orders from his quite impressive boss. We'll call her Elizabeth. That's just a throwback to Shadow of the Beanstalk. So he's got an impressive boss who is just quite intimidating. Okay, and she's
Quite is the understatement. of it.
and there's going to be 2 setback die added to the check because of he's under threat. If he lets anybody else through, it's the end of his new career.
Exactly. Well, maybe you add more setback to this.
Maybe 3.
Well, maybe just his duty is a setback because he knows he has to be very, very, as you say, stoic and vigilant.
Yep.
So maybe that alone has 2 setback, and his boss happens to be Elizabeth,
Yeah.
which is another 2 setback.
Yep. So that's 5 setback die that he's basically got. So, yeah, no one's coming through this door.
No,
It's as simple as that.
because he knows if he lets anyone in, even though if his mother came in
Yep.
and tried to get past, she would have a hell of a time.
There
Getting
could
rid of
also
through.
be psychological, even further. Maybe he knows that he is under risk of losing his job, and that back home, he's not going to be able to support himself. He'll lose his house.
His fear, one of his motivations is fear.
Fear.
He's got losing failure because he's gone through university with failure. He doesn't want to let that happen again.
Yep.
Let's add another setback because of that.
Yeah.
To any checkmate against him to let him to lower his guard. He's that untrusting of people and that willing to be that stoic guard.
So what are we up to?
6 setbacks.
Six setback. That's a lot of setback.
Yeah.
But we've given, I mean, apart from the fact that, you know, we've effectively created a massive backstory. But that's kind of what we're doing.
Well, this is
we're giving a reason why these setbacks are the way that they are. Now, those sorts of things can actually come up in play. Now, let's say that the players know this or have, through their cunning role-playing, have managed to speak to a buddy of his that knows this backstory. And through triumphs or through advantages or whatever else that they know this story. Those are the sorts of things that can actually remove setback from play.
The players could angle that stuff and use it against you. Could, if getting past this guard was a pivotal moment in the story, they could spend time trying to set up ways to remove that setback dice. And we could talk about that all day and how they might do it, but there's loads of ways they could approach it. And because those setback dice have been given a narrative purpose for being there, then sure, hey, they could falsify a document from his manager saying, you know, security protocols have been lowered for XYZ reasons, and that could remove 2 setback dice because he's less alert because the terrorists that were hanging around this area of the city, they've been arrested and absolved. So he's lowered his guard a little tiny bit.
Yeah. So we have crafted a story and an entire adventure just based on this one guy and working out where those setbacks have come from. So if as the GM, you're going, well, this person is going to have this ability, plus if they target his social side of things, that there are going to be 6 setback die. So the players then go through the stages of trying to remove it. And it may get down to that only 2 of those setback die
Actually
remain.
apply.
But if you're knack for it,
But if you've got knack for it, that's right. And so that gives a reason why that player who has knack for it may just have, you know, a little bit of a more softer approach.
But
he's a party's con artist.
Remember as well, if a player has a positive reason to, you know, that you might think that offsets a setback die,
Don't remove the setback
don't remove a setback die. That's not the reason. That's not what you should add a boost die and keep the setback there.
Yeah.
Say
As we discussed earlier.
they're old university buddies with Bob.
With Bob,
That could give, instead of removing setback dice.
Bob hasn't lost his fear of failure.
No, he's still
No,
He's
Sorry.
still on edge,
Absolutely.
but he knows you.
add a boost dice. And if you're best mates with him, add 2. But you flip a story point and say, well, I wasn't just mates with him. I was best mates with him.
We partied all the time.
Yeah, add 2 setback dice anytime you're having a social check with Bob.
We
Not
partied
setback, sorry. Boost dice.
We partied so much. Bob actually has a crippling addiction, and so so the storyteller might go, well, you know, he's absolutely on edge because he's, you know, got the shakes and
The storyteller, okay, cool. Yeah, let's add an extra setback for that. But Bob's aware of his weakness and his failings. Add a boost dice, but add a setback because of
as
that.
well.
So you're like, because you're waving this bottle of whiskey under Bob's nose. That could make him fold, or it could make him more
He's
resolute.
6 years sober.
Yeah, he could be like, no, man, I've been 6 years sober. Get that out of my face.
Yeah.
And that one extra setback could completely flub your roll, and you're merely wishing you didn't add that.
Yeah. That's where you basically have, you know, flip a story point and it's like it's 1 day off his 10-year badge that
Sobriety.
he gets for sobriety. So
And good on him.
Yeah, good on him. Well done, Bob.
Well, Bob never had the alcoholic problem as his grandfather. He's always been afraid of becoming the alcoholic.
Right. Okay.
Bob was flying straight all through university. He had a football scholarship lined up, but the knee injury landed him here as a security guard as a washout. And he knows the slippery slope to alcoholism if he lets his resolve drop. That's what happened to his grandfather after the war.
Right, of course. After the war.
Because he went home with post-traumatic stress syndrome, and Bob grew up with that.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just don't mention the war, because if you mention the war when you're talking to that character, that you automatically get another setback.
Well, I think it's more the case don't mention his grandfather.
Oh, don't mention his grandfather.
Because
Okay.
it's a bad time. The war's not so much a hang up for Bob.
Yeah.
It's more because Bob's parents weren't around, so he had to live with his grandfather, you see. So and his grandfather was an alcoholic and he was abusive. So mentioning the grandfather is actually really bad.
Yes. Now, as funny as that is, if you were doing some research on Bob and you rolled a whole heap of threat, okay, that would be a perfect example of how to apply setback die from that check to the other check.
Yeah,
by saying, oh, yeah, look, he absolutely, you know this information.
He grew up with his
but
grandfather. He must love his grandfather.
He must love his grandfather.
So, yeah,
cool, that's a great in.
actually-
I'll use that as an in.
This is amazing because if you've ever wondered how to spend threat on like a knowledge check,
Yep.
I've done my research on this character. The players succeeded, but they generated 6 threat.
Yeah.
So the storyteller takes two of those threat each time and adds this narrative story
Lie.
point. Well, not a lie. It's 100% true, but it's bad for the players.
It's you've got information from bloody clickbait sites.
Well, no. Like they may know everything about Bob.
Yeah.
But none of it's good.
No.
It's
No.
not going to help the players.
Exactly.
Bob, you know about his grandfather. You might be able to do something with that, but it's going to make your check harder later on.
Absolutely. That's a good example of a massive success, but with 4 or 5 threat
Yeah.
from a knowledge check. Sure, lots of stuff.
Spend
And-
it to give him background. The players know,
Yep.
but is not good for
It's
them.
not good for them. No, exactly.
GM Flano, I believe you asked us to remind you of something.
Yeah. So what I wanted to remind people is that because I was talking about an easy check before, and someone said something about vigilance. So remember, initiative checks are simple vigilance or cool checks.
Yep.
Add setback. If it's raining and you're out in the middle of it and something goes down, you might miss miss something important.
Just
Absolutely.
There could be 2 setback in that just because of the rain.
just because it's a simple check doesn't mean it ignores all the other rules of the
of the
checks.
game, yeah.
You can technically, as a GM, upgrade that simple check and add 1 purple to it
Yeah, could
by flipping a story point.
because this is something when you're fighting kobolds in the mine and it's dark, you might not see those kobolds coming down on you.
It's hard to lay an ambush for someone who's rolling a cool check if you don't see them coming.
Yeah, you might miss them approach.
Exactly. So it's
right.
setback during initiative checks. Very important.
Yeah,
Often overlooked.
remember it, and that crafts narrative. Once again, like just thinking about it, you're rolling your cool check to set that ambush. It's raining and it's dark. You've added 4 setbacks because of this. Because it's pouring down.
It's a hurricane, thunderstorm.
You don't even you miss the guy.
Is it that
that
truck
you're
you're
trying to
supposed to blow up your IED?
Yeah, it's
sailed
halfway down the
on
road
right past,
before
yeah.
you notice it's even there.
That's right. Exactly right.
That crafts story.
It's awesome.
Indeed. And I think that's probably a good point to make. I think that these setback die, and I know that Mike mentioned it before, the setback die are the brushes that you will use to tell a better story, to paint a better scene of what's about to happen.
They highlight what you've done so far. They're the first finishing touches and make your painting pop.
And they're not one and done. They will persist for that entire encounter.
And don't think you're being adversarial with them at all.
You know,
And if you think if you've been playing a fairly long-term game and you've never done setback dice in the way I was suggesting, well, then and your players might get their noses out of joint. Tell them to listen to this episode of the podcast because they will start getting appreciation of it as well.
and let them know that you're going to make the base difficulty easier for them.
Exactly. Like they might go, oh, okay, actually you're not bumping that difficulty up to 5 purple all the time because of raining and darkness. Cool, that's actually better for us.
Yeah.
So yeah, play everything right, and setback dice will be your best friend.
Yep. Agreed.
And a lot of what we said here as well, we mentioned boost dice before.
We've touched on this.
Boost
in the
dice,
past.
yeah, boost dice are a lot easier to add because a lot of mechanics add boost dice.
Yep.
But don't be afraid to apply these mechanics to boost dice. Also, going back to the door, for example,
Yep.
kicking that reinforced door. So you're looking at 2 purple because it's an average check. It's a wooden door. It's got the tri-bolt, which adds another 2 setbacks. So you're looking at 2 purple, 2 setback dice. But hey, the hinges on that door, they're 30 years old.
Yeah.
Because they're kicking in the door of some old abandoned factory.
Yep.
Give the players a boost or 2.
Hey, maybe the player has some really sturdy shoes on.
Or has a battering ram.
Or he has a battering ram. Yeah, that'd be 2 boost. Easy.
2 boost. Still an athletics check in the day, but that really helps having that battering ram and 2 boost. So exactly the same principle applies to boost. So don't think boosts only come from mechanical things in the game, like actual stated rules.
They're situational and equipment. So they're circumstance bonuses as well.
Exactly. They're positive modifiers. That's what they are. Sneaking up on someone, putting a knife into someone's ribs from behind, they don't know you're there because you've passed every single stealth check. Give that player 2 boost dice. They might not have a talent which will let you do that, but it's a circumstantial thing. Think of it like in D&D or any other role-playing game. When you sneak up on someone, it's like a +6 modifier normally in whatever game you're playing. It's no different to Genesis. Just because they haven't got a talent that says add 2 boost dice, add 2 boost dice to that particular attack.
And hey, look, maybe they do have a talent that adds that. Maybe they've got something like a sneak or something like that does give those extra boost die. Great.
Don't get hooked up on talents being the only way to add boost dice. Talents and weapons, because they should come from every other circumstantial source, just like Setback.
One thing that I'd like to point out as well for any listeners who are new to the game and are looking for ways to, they're listening to the episode and they're just going, okay, I've got all of these options for adding setback die that we've mentioned, and they're trying to come up with others. Write them down.
Yeah.
If you've got a whole heap of reasons why that a setback would be added to a open a door roll, write them down. Have your little notepad that's got all of those sorts of your GM sort of tips or things to remind you about, and look through them every so often, and just write down, okay, well, this was, this, or you may have seen something in a movie. That would be a really cool reason why that there would be a setback die for that. Write it down so you can refer to that all the time.
Yeah, movies are great. Make an exercise of it. If you're a budding GM, want to improve your GMing skills, because like anything we do in life, practice makes perfect.
Absolutely.
Same goes for GMing.
Yep.
See things in the real world or on screen or whatever, and ask yourself, what would that check look like? What would achieving that goal be like in the perfect circumstance? Then take into account all other modifiers that will add boost dice or setback dice. Make exercise of it. You're not trying to show it to anyone, just yourself. But after a while, you start getting a knack for it.
Indeed.
See what you did there.
I'm straight.
Very good. Well, I think that pretty much does it. As you can see, setback die are an important tool for the GM, and they shouldn't be as overlooked as they appear to be. We here at the Dice Ball Podcast are, as you can probably tell by our semi-coherent rambling, are very much advocates of the humble setback die, and we encourage you to use them in all of your games and in every single check.
There could be groups out there who are doing this perfectly right. If you are, awesome. But if you're not, listen up.
Exactly. Very good. All right, should we move on to a few questions that we've got from our listeners?
Don't you mean behind the screens?
Yes, I do. Behind the screens. And welcome to Behind the Screens, where we, the host of the show, will answer your games and rules questions regarding the Genesis role-playing game. And tonight, we have some great questions. So thanks for those people who've written in. So, Huzz, what's the first question for tonight?
Well, it's worth also mentioning before we get too deep into it.
Yes.
We've received a lot of questions because we've been sort of spamming the old Facebook with some memes.
We have.
Which is great.
Which worked better than... Yeah,
it's pretty good.
It's good.
We do have a lot of questions. We do have them all filed, and we will
get to them.
We'll work through them one at a time.
Absolutely.
And have them up our sleeve, essentially. So keep sending them in. Even though we have a way of managing them that we just keep adding them, and we keep just harvesting from them.
We may not get to them immediately, but we will get to them.
Certainly get to them, yep.
Absolutely.
But our first question comes via Facebook by Tyler Comstock. I'm looking to start an RPG club at the school I work at. One concern is time. We have only an hour to play each week. Do you have any advice on getting the most out of our sessions?
That's a really good question.
It is. That's why I grabbed it.
And indeed. Now, I can honestly say that I've had a chat with Ethan, who is my son, who has this exact same issue. They have an hour that they play after school because one of their GM is one of the teachers, and they've actually got an extracurriculum activity, which is kind of weird for a private school.
Hey, look, when I was in school, they threatened us with expulsion.
You did do street D&D.
We did exactly this in an hour during our lunch breaks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that Ethan has the same issue on a Thursday,
Yeah.
Between like at the lunchtime. Okay.
Little does he know how good he has.
I know, right?
Not even playing a role-playing game at school at lunchtime is the most obscure thing
In a Catholic
the world.
school.
Any school, dude. If I cracked out D&D at my high school, because I went to a public high school for those listening out there, and it was back in the day, it was rough.
Yeah.
You would basically get.
A massive wedgie.
Oh no, not Morayfield High School. Give you an idea, like one of the things in Morayfield High School that when I was there, they would do.
Morayfield.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Right. Hi to all of our listeners in
One
Morayfield.
of the popular things they would do
Yes.
was get slingshots and fire those really compressed
The
rubber
wasps.
bouncy balls.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no, the bouncy balls.
Slingshots, dude, not paper wasps.
Oh, right.
Slingshots. These things would break
Yeah,
glass.
I've got a Shanghai. Yeah.
Exactly.
Jeez.
And fire them at people. That was Morayfield High School.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Gospel Podcast does not condone
Yeah,
the
don't
use
do
of
this.
But then again,
Do not do this.
I feel, yes, anyway, go on.
So, yes. So, I had a little bit of a chat with him with regards to how he handles it. And they are super focused. And hats off to the GM who's running them. He is a teacher, so he's got a lot of experience with regards to dealing with kids generally, especially 15-year-old boys who are just all of hormones and ready to go. But it's super focused, and it's very much an encounter based. So they will play a single encounter. They'll put as much effort as they need to really fully describe the scene, but they will just focus on that one encounter. And then once the encounter finishes, that's it. So if their encounter basically just takes 20, 30 minutes, that's all that it takes. Yep. They resign themselves to the fact that they're doing one encounter or one scene every hour block. And that's actually one way that, and I know that we talked about this briefly in the last episode when talking about running a convention game, that one encounter should be somewhere in the vicinity of 3/4 of an hour to an hour. And then when you run your module, it's basically 3 encounters.
Yeah, and that
tell a story.
includes setup, investigation,
Yep.
combat,
Absolutely.
Now,
which is your resolution.
Yeah, definitely.
I've also got some tips for Tyler in regards to this because I've been recently running games of Genesis for my family who aren't role players by any stretch,
Right.
but they enjoy the story of it.
Yeah.
So I find ways to try and increase the time, to decrease the time on the table, but increase the story being told. A couple of things. It's funny, I was talking to Keith Capel, friend of the show, at Game Nation and about this because he's doing a similar thing. He's running games for a library group, I think he said.
Yep.
So he's got a lot of experience in this too. So he's someone to ask about this as well. But him and I actually, by sheer coincidence, shared almost exactly the same time condensing techniques. One, don't roll for initiative. Have players just simply go PC, NPC, PC, NPC. Simple as that. If I'm assuming Tyler's, he's out of school, so the kids are quite young. Don't bother bogging the game down with the initiative roll and stuff like that. Just
jump straight in.
easy peasy, no rolls required. That saves time.
Yep.
Doesn't really change a whole lot, really. The kids get to punch some things or shoot some things or tell a fun story. One thing I did just recently at a game I ran for 2 friends who had visited from Melbourne is I didn't even bother tracking maneuvers or actions in encounters. I just went, they described what they wanted to do, and I gave them a dice roll. And if they wanted to be in range of someone to punch them, I just say, yeah, sure, you move up to them and punch them. And it took away number crunching. Sure, it's not the correct way to play the game, but it becomes a very fluid narrative way to tell the game, and it doesn't slow the game down at all. It doesn't overwhelm players. It doesn't give them that analyst paralysis at all. They just go, oh, cool, I want to run up there and cut that guy's throat. Sweet, you do that. Make a roll. Oh, but you've had to run right across that field. So you've had to like really strain yourself to get there. Take 2 strain or roll 2 setback dice on your check. Don't micromanage it. And younger audiences will love it. People who aren't very familiar with the hardcore mechanics of the game will love it. And more importantly, in Tyler's situation, it'll save you time.
Yeah, transition between scene and combat,
Smooth.
Yep.
instant.
And when your combats are basically describe what you're going to do to me, what you're going to do, go. You have about 3 seconds of screen time, 3 to 5 seconds of screen time. What does your character do? And that, as soon as you put that time limit on it as well, that sort of helps them, give them a sort of mental image of what they can achieve in that moment.
Absolutely. Very good. Well, hopefully that answers your question, Tyler. If you do have any follow-ups, let us know, and we'll get on to that further. So, Flano, would you like to take us through our next question?
We have a question here from Death by Soup.
And it's long.
It's a long one, so buckle up.
But it's a good one.
It's a good one. He starts by saying, love the podcast. Very informative and helpful. Keep it up, guys.
Yay. Thanks, man.
Yeah, we love that. And then he's got, I'm currently a GM for a custom space opera setting. I think Douglas Adams meets Star Trek.
I want to play that already.
Absolutely.
Is it weird that I don't know what Douglas Adams is?
Really? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Dirk Gently?
Yeah, I'm with you now.
Yeah, I love Dirk Gently. But it's called Spacey Space Adventures. And I came up against a situation I struggled to find a balanced solution for. So one of my PCs, a living space mushroom, wanted to throw 4 recently acquired crates of mushrooms into the airlock because his fear is being seen as food, and vegans apparently. He's afraid of vegans.
Everyone is, dude.
The rest of the PCs didn't want this because it was food and supplies for a few weeks. I tried to turn this into a social encounter with roles, but I couldn't quite figure out a method of structuring it. Initially, I tried just one-on-one roles, but I got the feeling I was excluding the other members of the group. I then abandoned roles altogether and just let them have a discussion. However, this led to the encounter having no structure and was omitting key aspects such as strain threshold and the revealing of fears / motivations, etc. How would you run a one versus many social encounter between PCs?
This is a really important question and gets asked often. Now, I know that, Mike, you've recently run our Shadows of the Beanstalk game where this exact situation occurred.
See, this is an interesting one additionally as well because it's PC versus PC.
Yep.
And depending on your playgroup, you may not want players to roll against players.
I generally have a rule of thumb: never roll against another player.
I agree as well.
But
everyone, if you
I have a potential solution, but I'll let you go.
Yep, GM Death Bunny. Sorry, not Death Bunny. Death by Soup. Although Death Bunny is a great GM name, so someone should take
Got to
that.
remember that.
GM Death by Soup quite clearly allows that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Everyone on the table is chill. Great. But yes, the situation does come up a lot, and it is an oversight with the social encounter rules, if you ask me. Because one NPC, because most of the time one player is going to make an argument against the group. So let's take away the fact this is PC versus PC. Let's just go NPC versus PCs. One NPC, big bad, is often going to be versing a group of NPCs, a group of PCs. So that means that by rule, that NPC has to target the strain threshold of every single NPC to win that argument, which is damn hard when he's got one action, multiple targets, who all in return have multiple chances to try and wear him down. So the disparity is very uneven. And obviously, Death Bunny.
Death by Soup.
Death by Soup. I don't know why I'm saying Death Bunny.
You got bunnies on your head.
I don't know. Well,
I think he also goes by the name Cabernock.
I'm going to call him Death by
I
Death
don't
Bunny.
get that.
Monty Python.
Very good.
Right. Now I understand.
Well played, sir.
Very
But
good.
anyway, yes,
I am ashamed of you.
Sorry.
Now let's talk about if this was a NPC versus PC. It's the same situation. There is ways you can get around that, and that's to use the Nemesis rule. of allowing them to act multiple times in an encounter.
Now, this is something that comes up that it hasn't actually been revealed in Genesis, but it is something that they do in Star Wars. It was first introduced in the Edge of the Empire GM screen when it talked about having Nemesis.
Correct.
Cool.
So basically what that allows you to do is to have one single awesome Nemesis, which is probably the equivalent to a player character, act twice in a round. And that basically gives them a chance to really get their point across, targeting a group of people. And so it gives them a chance to wear people down before they can be worn down themselves. Now, there is ways to get around this that are alternative. Instead of trying to target each member of the group that's partaking in the social combat, me and GM Hooly were actually discussing it not long before the conversation after reading the question. An idea that popped into my mind is you don't use individual strain thresholds. You do a, what do you call it, resolve? Resolve level.
Yep.
The resolve level is equal to the singular person strain, or in the case of a group, it's the average of the group. So if you're versing a group, say, sit around 11 to 13 strain, averages out to about 12. So that single person is trying to wear down that resolve. And when they wear that resolve down, just like strain or add resolve threshold damage or whatever you want to call it, basically when that's worn down, they win that argument. And the group of players or NPCs go, okay, fair enough, we get your point, and it's done. It doesn't continue on forever because he's not having to target every single person in the social encounter. And it makes it a much more fluid system, I feel.
So there's a couple of things I'd like to add as well, is that in the rules, there is a section that talks about if you get a NPC under half of their strain, they sort of, what do we call it? They come to a compromise. So as a player, if you're in a social encounter and the story and the big bad gets you under half, you should probably consider role-playing that maybe you're having second thoughts about this whole argument, and that you're trying to maybe not argue so hard.
The problem...
and this goes sort of into the face of what combat does, is that if you suddenly are at 4, like if you've got 10 health, if you've got 10 wounds, if you've got a wound threshold of 10, and then suddenly you take 5 wounds, right? You'll keep on fighting because you don't go down until you've reached
0.
You've hit 0. This kind of goes
beyond 0. But
this kind of goes against that by saying that as soon as you reach half, that you should be changing your approach differently.
Yeah, you should maybe be considering your approach. Maybe you are no longer trying to argue hard against them, but you might maybe trying to convince everyone to come to some sort of agreement.
Which is fine. That system works. But where the problem comes is that single individual, just by sheer number crunch, is going to be worn down before the group.
Absolutely,
and that is the problem.
Yeah, but I'm not to go against what you're saying. I'm saying that as this.
It's a good thing to take into consideration.
Another way, because then he doesn't have to look at getting everyone to 0. He only has to look at getting them to half.
True.
Because if he gets the entire party to half, then
he's not going to be able to achieve that, though.
No, that's a very difficult thing.
But if you had a resolve mechanic where it's an average value, it can come down to half quite easily.
Maybe he has a couple of minions standing by his shoulder that are looming.
But this is the problem. Though. In this situation,
no.
It's singular.
That's right.
100% singular. What Death by Soup here, I could be reading what he's written here. He's asking how to structure it. I'm assuming the problem is how do you structure 1v1 and 1v many and keep it balanced.
Yeah.
It's tough. It varies. You have to house rule it, as we've suggested, and see how you go. Don't give up on the social encounters. Maybe try the average strain out there. And yes, a group of people should have a overbearing feel.
Yeah.
But give that as setback dice. I'm making an argument against 5 people. Okay? Mm-hmm. Those 5 people are saying, no, they're really harassing you. But I shouldn't have to try and wear them all down one by one. Because in real life, that's not how it works. When you're targeting a mob of people, you're generally sort of hitting them all at once with your words. So everyone should be sort of being convinced or argued against on equal terms. But how these rules work, you target one. As Raw, you only target one person at a time. If you have it as that shared resolve, it represents that group's sort of opinion being worn down. But because they do outnumber you with their own voices and whatnot, add setback dice to your checks against the group. Could be one setback per person you're arguing against. Then if you have a knack for it, you're really good at arguing against groups because,
Another thing that you may want to consider as well is that if you're sort of GM that has a list of what the strain threshold is for each of the characters, and you're actually keeping track of that, either mentally or otherwise, as soon as they reach that point where they have reached half, where players don't want to, they still want to continue fighting, even though that they've reached that point.
No compromise has been met.
That's right. But in actual fact, according to the rules, a compromise has been met.
Well, no.
There is nothing to suggest that the GM can't say, you're wavering a little bit, have a couple of setback die.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's not a bad point.
Lots of things you can do with it.
Because those sorts of things then can
It'll stack up.
create threat, which technically I guess you could be then, well, you're starting to waver in your argument, and if we talk about narrative-wise, that those threat represent that you're wavering, which gives the bad guys some additional resolve.
Yeah.
So they might get either some boost, or if you wanted to go to this stage, they can actually gain some strain back themselves.
Get some resolve back. So this is where it's interesting, because if you're using the one resolve threshold, essentially, recovering strain or resolve in this case, the group of player, the group that's being argued against, they will be in their own echo chamber of opinion.
Yep.
Right? So that means that they're recovering resolve faster because each person's still making a check.
Yep.
That's arguing against that single player or that single character. So it means their resolve, yes, it wears down at a sort of equal level to a single person, but it recovers faster because more characters can spend advantages to recover strain.
Yep. True.
Another thing, another way of doing it, which I've just sort of thought of, is that you can, if you think about it, if you're having an argument with, say you've got a big family and you're arguing with your brothers and sisters. Normally in a big group situation, one person takes the lead.
Yeah.
And acts as a point man for the argument that you're making. So if in this particular situation you've got the mushroom man arguing against the ship, probably the ship's captain is going to take the lead on this argument. Now, that's not to say that we're quashing the voice of everyone else that's arguing with them.
Well, not at all, because they can still make rolls.
Or they could add skilled assistance or boosts to the lead man's check. But the point is that the person who is the point man of the larger group is the only person that really needs convincing.
Yeah, that's another great way of doing it.
And that's going to simplify your whole thing here, because they could be making checks in the background to try and lower this person's threshold, but they could also be adding doing things to boost the leader's ability to make an argument.
Absolutely. In this case here, Death by Soup's question, it's an odd one because it is player v player, and depending on your group, I love that idea that you've got, and that's a great suggestion for when you're targeting NPCs or NPC versus player, because NPCs aren't going to be sad because they're NPCs. And if the players go into that social encounter knowing those rules because they are targeting a villain or villain's targeting them, then they're less likely to be upset by the result. If it's player v player, if I'm on the side of the captain where I don't want to throw away the food goods, the captain might have a terrible, terrible strain.
Yeah.
He might have 8 strain. And his resolve might get worn down to the point where, not resolve, sorry, I'm saying resolve all the time now. His strain threshold might get worn down to the point where he's like, fine, okay, yep, we're not going to throw them away. I agree with you, Mr. Mushroom Man. But what that might do, and it comes down completely to your group of players and their mentality, the players might go, okay, fair enough, the captain of the ship has decided that, and my character in the course of role-playing would respect the captain's opinion.
Yeah.
But that's a mature group of players, or assuming the captain has crew that obey every command.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful that doesn't create more social conflict at the table
Yeah.
and
But
behind the dice.
What this could do, though, the way that you can run it is, say the Mushroom Man does convince the captain, or he at least gets him to compromise and say, look, I'll let you throw away,
just the mushrooms.
Just the mushrooms, but you've got to let us, whatever the compromise comes to be. And the rest of the players don't agree with that. Maybe this means that the captain starts arguing on the side of the Mushroom Man.
Absolutely.
And then it turns into more of a fair sort of a thing. Maybe the captain's now looking at a new social encounter, try and prevent a mutiny.
Absolutely.
Maybe.
But my point is here, because it's player v player, you have to be careful it doesn't create
Absolutely.
player
Dramas at the
player
table.
conflict, not character conflict.
Yeah.
And they're two vastly different things, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of GMs don't like players rolling dice against players, because you can have
That's
that character who's awesome
exactly
at social stuff commanding another character, which feels bad.
Yeah.
So something to be aware of.
It feels really bad
Exactly.
when and I've had it in some games that I've played in the past. There's like the equivalent of talents that mean that you can turn an NPC into an ally
Exactly.
without there's not even a roll. And so trying to use those against a player, and you just go, well, look, you now believe my point of view because I say so. And as a player, you're just like, well, my character's just been destroyed.
He's being railroaded, essentially.
Yeah.
But it's funny because if you're in a play group who doesn't like rolling against other players, then it's weird. It's a double-edged sword,
It is.
because the players then have to respect that no rolls are being made, and they have to act with their character's integrity as if they would believe. Would my character believe your character, or wouldn't he believe the character? It's a weird sort of like odd scenario that can create issues, which is funny.
I had another thought. It doesn't always just have to be one side versus the other. If you do convince that captain to maybe compromise, maybe he becomes a third faction in this discussion.
It could get really, really heated, really, really interesting.
Those that wish to compromise, starting to argue against both sides, and until one side comes out on top.
Yep. I think the point is that when it comes to player v player, in social encounters more than anything else, but certainly in combat as well, try to avoid it as much as you possibly can.
Yes and no. Like I can see some groups being able to do it very, very well.
It depends on the experience level
Exactly.
and the maturity of them.
And down to basically summarize GM Death by Soup's query, by all means keep making rolls in your social encounters.
Yeah.
If it's player v player or player versus NPC or whatever, if it happens to be targeting one player against a group, take our ideas and suggestions. There's lots of ways you can do it. Just don't be afraid to step out of the rules as written, because they do have their blind spots.
As one final suggestion for this, because we've got to end this show sometime. Instead of going to the social rules, I love them, I do, but instead of going to the social rules, maybe do a mix of both. Maybe role play out the arguments on both sides. And as a storyteller, you go, well, you adjudicate a little bit and you say, well, you've made some good points. You made X, Y, Z. So have some boosts.
Yep.
Mm.
You've made some good points. So, X, Y, Z. So you're going to add setbacks to that person's check.
Yep.
And you resolve it in a single roll mechanic.
Right.
It's not making it. And then, honestly, that's one of the easiest ways of doing it. Let the
And
players
so-
naturally role play it out, then resolve it with a dice roll.
Not everything needs to be done when it comes to social encounters. Not everything needs to be done as a combat / social encounter.
combat.
Yeah.
It can just go down to, okay, you give your point, the other person gives their point, it goes down to a success or failure, adding in flavour using advantages and threat.
Yeah, like
Yep.
Death by Soup, he says, he references motivations here, like fear and etc.
Yep.
If you want to do a one roll check, you can still put them into the check.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a
And
setback die for the fear.
The benefit of doing it this way as well is it means that everybody agrees when you start with this that they're going to abide by the result.
Yep.
That's actually a good point. Yeah, you make that clear at the start. So if we're going to enter the social combat, if your characters fail this check, the character, not you controlling it, has come to this conclusion.
Yep.
They have that, their mind, not the guy pulling the strings, on screen, this is what they do.
Absolutely.
Yep.
As long as you go into that understanding.
And there can still be compromise there depending on how the dice roll out.
Absolutely. Very good. Well, that hopefully that answers your question, Death by Soup.
Keep sending them because I'm going to keep putting memes up. And they're going to get lame and tacky, but you know what? I don't care.
Indeed. So that brings us to the end of another show. If you have any questions like these, you can send us an email to info@thedicepodcast.com, or you can post your questions to Facebook, to Twitter, and you can also go on to the Dicepod Podcast page, which has a form submission that you can also put your questions up on there. We've got lots of ways that you can get in contact with us now. You can even go to YouTube, in fact. But
also make sure to follow us in your various social medias, such as Facebook and Twitter. And you can find us quite easily by searching at Dicepod Podcast. We also have our community group, which is always popping off. There's always a lot more loosey-goosey discussion there between the fans.
Absolutely.
So jump on there and chuck up whatever you feel like it's a good idea to chuck up, because it's a lot more interactive with our social group.
Indeed.
Do we mention Discord?
No, I don't think we did.
No, we're also on Discord too. Find us at the D20
Radio.
D20 Radio Network Discord page.
You know that thing that we're on a network of?
Yeah, but it's a D20. I'm like, how many sides do they have again? But yes, Discord. We're hoping to to bump up our Discord a little bit, because I know personally, I still don't see Discord as social media. Because for me, I go on Discord to play video games, and it's a VoIP channel for me.
Yeah.
So it's the weirdest thing that Discord, almost overnight, has now become this social media platform.
Indeed.
Because it's in my brain.
I mean, to us, it's overnight. But
I was there at the dawn Discord, and everyone slammed me saying it's not a good service.
I know.
And now everyone's like, Discord's amazing. I'm like, yeah, it is.
So yes, you can basically find us there by searching for, as you said before,
the Roll20.
The Roll20, D20 Radio. And you'll be able to find us there. We have our own hashtag there, which is kind of cool. Very good. All right, boys. Well, that basically brings to us the end of another show. Thank you all for listening. If you really like the podcast, give us a like on Facebook. Send us a review on iTunes. It makes a huge difference to our ratings. Plus, don't forget to review us on Facebook as well. So I think that's pretty much a wrap. I'm GM Hooly.
I'm GM Huzz.
And I'm GM Flano.
And together we are the Dicepod Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dicepod Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dicepod Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains a property of the Dicepod Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesis role-playing game, the Genesis logo, content, and all material remain property of Fantasy Flight Games.